Hello, everybody. I am Neal Coolong. You are listening to the New Standard Podcast. We are coming at you here, 4:40 Eastern, 3:40 Central, Tuesday, August 29th, also known as the final roster cutdown day within the NFL. The Steelers have announced all of the players that have released. Instead of the highlights, I guess we'll go over those right away. Some of the more notable cuts that they made. Longtime veteran tight end Zach Gentry was released. News that came out earlier in the day. Safety Trey Norwood was also cut, a former seventh round pick of the Steelers. Quincy Roche, a former sixth round pick of the Steelers, goes 0 for 2 in training camps with the Steelers. He released. Nick Kiwatowski, free agent signing of the Steelers, was let go, as was defensive tackle Bryden Fayoko, a player I actually was big on probably up until the signing of Wisconsin defensive tackle, the drafting Wisconsin defensive tackle Keanu Benton, a player who played, I thought, exceptionally well during the preseason and probably made Fayoko expendable. A very solid player overall. And if anything, the release of a player like Fayoko shows the level of depth that this team has built over the last couple kind of dark seasons. They've put together a very strong roster overall. And I think we're seeing that play out here with the level of talent of the players that they cut, guys that they paid to come in to compete for spots and weren't able to do that, probably due to the internal depth that the team has built. The Steelers are down to 53 players. They do have, interestingly enough, we'll go over who they do have on the team right now. As of 3:42 p.m. Central, 2 punters on the roster: kicker Presley Harvin III, as well as Braden Mann. I think odds are pretty good they're not going to keep 2 punters heading into their week 1 game against the 49ers, but for now they have 2. You can probably expect a move or multiple moves leading into the kickoff week of practice leading into week 1. Some of the moves that we have seen to this point, I think, would probably be best defined as multiple things that I would have bet strongly against happening. One, the trade for Kevin Dotson, which happened 2 days ago, swapping picks basically with swapping 2 mid-round picks each with the Rams for former Steelers guard Kevin Dotson. A move that really indicates just how depleted the Rams are along their offensive line. We didn't think it could get a whole lot worse for the Houston Texans offensive line, but they proved us wrong today in acquiring Kendrick Green from the Steelers. The Steelers losing much of the offensive line, internal offensive line depth that they had from one perspective. From another, they ridded themselves of 2 players that clearly they did not want on their roster, considering they signed not 1 but 2 offensive guards. Isaac Seumalo from the Eagles, right after they had signed Nick Herbig from the Nate Herbig. That's going to be a problem all year, isn't it? Nate Herbig from the Jets, giving the Steelers the argument, at least, that they bolstered their depth already, and neither Dotson nor Green were necessary anymore. Does that mean that they're done with it? I don't know. What we have right now, and I delayed in starting this show because I wanted to see if any other moves would be announced in the meantime. There obviously are going to be other moves, not just for the Steelers, but for every team in the NFL. Nobody is really, they'll get to 53, and from there, figure out exactly what they want to do with their rosters from that point. What's going to happen now is all of the players released who are not vested veterans, and a vested veteran is a player with 4 years of service in the NFL. All of those players go through the waiver process, which means basically everyone's going to have everyone in that pool is offered up to every team in something like a draft order, and it goes by, in fact, the first round draft order of 2023 in terms of selecting waivers. And then when that team selects somebody, they go to the end of the line. All of those players are done one at a time. It's kind of a lengthy process, and they give every team a day before waivers will start, the claiming period of waivers, just so every team can have some opportunity to look and make sure they know of every player that was released. This is obviously the largest transaction day on the NFL calendar. So there's a lot for everybody to go through. There are a lot of things that everyone is still going to take a look at and evaluate. There will still be players added and players released. Might even be trades still to come. We will see. Interestingly enough, within the Sports Illustrated Slack channel, my breaking news team there, we were just discussing how interesting it was that the New England Patriots, as of deadline of cuts, have one quarterback on their roster. Unfortunately for them, that quarterback is Mac Jones. So I would imagine they would want to add some more, but I was admonished for that opinion, being advised by some of the Patriots fans within that group that Mac Jones beat the Steelers this past year. Thank you, Mitch Trubisky. Mitch Trubisky made the team. Not an incredible surprise, as did Mason Rudolph. Neither of those are a surprise. Keep in mind not a new rule, but the reestablishment of a previous rule says a team is allowed to dress a third emergency quarterback who will not count on the game day roster, but doing that limits their ability to add a player from the practice squad to the game day roster as well. My guess was Rudolph on a veteran minimum contract, was signed to fulfill that as needed. We will see what happens with that, but Rudolph and Trubisky are there again, obviously, to back up the legitimate starter, Kenny Pickett. Anthony McFarland became the team's presumed third running back, not necessarily a slam dunk decision for the team. I would imagine there was some thought that went into that. McFarland has been up and down. He's been cut. He's been made. He's made rosters. He's contributed on special teams. I'm not exactly sure what his role is going to be or how long he's going to be on the team, but he initially made it. That was something of a surprise to me. 6 wide receivers, the 4 we knew about, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Allen Robinson, and Calvin Austin were locks. We knew that, but they kept both Miles Boykin and Gunnar Olszewski, 2 players that at best are special teams contributors and at worst are on the field catching passes. Hopefully it is not a situation in which either one of them have to get the ball in a competitive game. We'll see what happens with that as well. I wouldn't necessarily, to me, Olszewski makes a little bit more than Boykin does this year. Both of them are a good chunk above the minimum. I'm not overly surprised, I guess, that they kept 6, considering the special teams contributions of Boykin, who's one of the better gunners in the league, pun intended, because Gunnar himself is one of the worst gunners in the league, just for being himself. But you don't have a backup in the slot without Olszewski. So I think they might be set with those 6. Interesting. That word is grossly overused today. Every move is interesting to everybody. Maybe it's not so interesting. Maybe it's Gunnar Olszewski and maybe he sucks and they don't really have anybody better. I don't know. Not that interesting. Kind of interesting. 2 tight ends, at least how they're describing it. Now, let's keep in mind, there's no rule that says they have to have X amount of players at any one spot. Typically, though, they have kept 3 tight ends, 3 defined tight ends, as we would guess. As I mentioned, with Zach Gentry's release, that means Darnell Mount Washington being the second tight end of the 2 that they have alongside Pat Freiermuth. Interestingly, though, and this is kind of interesting, Connor Hayward is listed as a fullback / tight end, which is not a position they've defined the way that they are doing it now. I don't know whether that matters or not, but it does point out that essentially Hayward is going to see time as an H-back as well as an inline tight end, which is something he's been building toward and played pretty well, I thought, down the stretch. So an interesting decision there, kind of interesting. Zach Gentry, the veteran, being let go, somewhat in favor of Darnell Washington and somewhat in favor of a hybrid role with Connor Hayward. I can see why they would do that. Along the offensive line, 7th-round rookie Spencer Anderson makes the team after the trades of both Kevin Dotson and Kendrick Green, which I still am beside myself how they pulled that off. Getting assets for both of those players that's unreal. No way. I would have bet against that 10 times out of 10 easily. You could have probably bumped that up a good chunk of money. Did not think that was going to happen. Dylan Cook, first-year player out of Montana, FCS Pride, a team that North Dakota State kicked the hell out of not too long ago. But Dylan Cook, good player, very surprising, I thought anyway. But depth is kind of a thing right now with the offensive line that they have. We are not done yet. Don't think that that's going to be their absolute final roster there. Would not be surprised if Dylan Cook was kept through to go on injured reserve, or perhaps he's going to be somebody who's cut along with the punter that they don't need to make room for other players that they're going to make moves with. Steelers are not done yet, but as we probably would have guessed, Isaac Seumalo, Chuks Okorafor, Dan Less Jr., not surprised that he did make the team. Broderick Jones, Nate Herbig, James Daniel, and Mason Cole all made the roster, and I would expect them to stick. On the defensive side, we spoke often about the possibility of this being one of the better Steelers defensive lines in quite some time. They had a lot of depth going into it. I thought Bryden Fayoko, he's a very good NFL player. I think they signed him for the right reasons, but I think that Keanu Benton proved he belongs on day one. I think Benton is their starter, and because of that, that makes, I think, Fayoko's role a little less desirable. And unfortunately for him, he was released, but a very good player, just beaten out by a freak, frankly. Benton was beyond impressive from what I saw, but they did keep Montravius Adams, DeMarvin Leal, all that is man, Isaiah Loudermilk, Larry Ogunjobi, Armon Watts, another guy to keep an eye on as far as potential moves somewhere else, though depth is important. Wouldn't be surprised if they kept him. Oh, yeah, and Cam Hayward. Probably going to keep Cam Hayward on the team. Linebackers, Nick Hiwatowski, a player that I don't think was a lock, certainly when they brought him in, but I think in what seems to be sort of a new, what do you want to call it? A new style, if you will, for Omar Khan. It's almost as if he built up the depth first and then went after the impact players in the free agent signings that he had. He signed Nick Herbig, Nate Herbig before he signed Isaac Seumalo. And as far as the linebackers went, Kiwatowski as well as Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts were signed before Quan Alexander was. And I thought Alexander looked better than all of them, though I thought Holcomb and Roberts made plays as well during the preseason. Interesting what they're looking to do, linebacker. Mildly interesting, not fully full-on interesting. Nick Herbig, I did it right. I now have a complex about that. Nick Herbig was not a surprise in making the team, but it will be, I think, pretty interesting to see what they do with him as far as week one is concerned. Another year for James Pierre. Fans will probably hate that. I think it's great. The undrafted project player now into the real money years in the NFL. He made this team. I was not 100% convinced he was going to. As we heard, surprisingly, the New Orleans Saints parted ways with veteran cornerback Bradley Roby, a player that's scheduled to make $3 million of the season and has gone through his bonus money in a 3-year deal signed with the Saints 2 years ago. I was interested to see that he was on the market, and very interested is how I would label that level of interest. As far as being a pretty solid slot defender, I think in a lot of ways. Probably not going to be the special teams player that Pierre was, and maybe that's ultimately what they see Pierre as doing with this team. Chandon Sullivan was signed to man the slot, and it looks like they're going to go with that. Obviously, Joey Porter Jr., Levi Wallace, cornerbacks, Minka Fitzpatrick, DeMonte Casey, Miles Killebrew, Keanu Neal. They kept Elijah Riley. They kept to play safety in a variety of different roles. I mean, Keanu Neal is probably not going to be any more of a pure safety than he will be a pure linebacker. You'll see him kind of in and around the line of scrimmage situationally when he does play. Your kicker, once again, Chris Boswell. Your punter, I would imagine, Presley Harvin III, assuming he is not going on injured reserve. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. I have not heard that either way, but you don't keep two punters on your team. So maybe something's going on there. We'll find out. Christian Kuntz, your long snapper, once again. I spoke for a very long time, much longer than I thought that I was going to. In case you're wondering or concerned, I'm Neal Coolong. You are listening to the New Standard Podcast. We are doing a special roster breakdown show, but we will air again tomorrow. New show. Lance will be with us. He is out right now making the streets safe from communists and everything else that he does for the secret agency we are not allowed to mention on camera. We just decided to get into it right away here in this show. I didn't really introduce anything, but a lot going on. I would expect more moves. I can't really tell us straight what they're going to be, and I'm not going to, because I'm the guy who told you that there was no way they were going to get buyers for Kendrick Green or Kevin Dotson. There was no way anybody was going to trade for them. I think I also said nobody was going to trade for Chase Claypool either. I don't really understand what's going on in the NFL, but clearly it's a seller's market, and Omar Khan taking yet another step toward his eventual Executive of the Year award for the football season of 2023. We are very excited to see that happen, and we are also very excited to be hosting the show for you throughout the season. We are going to air on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. or 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific every Wednesday throughout the year. We're going to get into it. I'm looking forward to everything. I'm reading through your comments here right now. Feel free to ask questions. We'll get going. I honestly have absolutely no clue what you're talking about. Can't help being French vanilla. Not even French. Oh, I kind of am, I guess. Very long story I'll get into another time, but Coolong isn't exactly a real name. It was misunderstood at Ellis Island and changed into something else that it wasn't. So there is some Frenchness there. Primarily, I am Irish, however. It's more of what I affiliate with, I think, for obvious reasons. I was surprised by the release of Zach Gentry. Not in a shocked kind of way, but I would have thought they would have liked to have kept 3 tight ends. Now, again, I'm going to say this constantly today and tomorrow. Tomorrow's show, 10 a.m. Eastern. Tune in with Lance. We'll bring out the big guns then. I would have thought they would have kept 3 tight ends. That isn't to say they're not going to have 3 tight ends. That isn't to say that they don't want to have Connor Hayward fill in when needed. But nobody was a bigger Darnell Washington fan than me. Nobody. I didn't think he was ready for that type of a role. If they want to play a more traditional 12 personnel package, which I definitely think that they should, considering the ability that they have with Freiermuth, and I would have thought Gentry as well, they do some damage with 12. Apparently, they're comfortable not having Gentry, maybe a little bit higher of a salary, but top to bottom, not a bad situation with those two. It's not what they want to do. Maybe Darnell Washington is a little bit more ready than I thought that he'd be. Maybe they're expecting him to just grow into the role. Maybe it's Hayward's. Maybe they're going to run a lot more flex and a lot more variation out of 12 than I would anticipate. So definitely on the higher side of interest to see what the Steelers will do with their tight ends this season. If anyone else is seeing anything that is happening, feel free to let me know. There will be other moves. That is a guarantee. You are listening to the New Standard Podcast. I am Neal Coolong. Lance Williams is usually with me doing all this type of chit chat, but he is on assignment and unable to comment. Or he is commenting. He's unable to be here on camera. That beautiful bastard is off doing something else. Not helping us out while we're here. Yes, please like and subscribe. Do all of that, the stuff that Lance does on this show that I told. Questions, guys, have anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. We're going to have a much more detailed show tomorrow. I assure you there will be a lot more things happening between now and then is 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. Hopefully you're able to tune in to the New Standard full show tomorrow. We are going to break down everything that's going on, including the two punters that, yes, we did talk about. I don't know if either of them will be dealt. I would imagine they would just be cut because I'm not going to say again that a player can't get traded. It has not worked well for me. I don't anticipate either player getting traded. I think one of the punters will get cut or Presley Harvin is going to be placed on injured reserve, which I don't see happening because I don't know, but it seems like there are always injuries that you don't know about. And when they can bring players back after 4 weeks now, it seems to be, a guy has a hamstring injury. It's almost better to just put him on injured reserve and get his backup in tow right away. They would have had to clear through to the 53-man roster in order to do that. So I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I'm just saying it wouldn't surprise me. Yes, as I pointed out on social media, I found it really funny. The Steelers have two punters and the Eagles don't have any. I think there's an obvious deal that could be made there, but I don't know. There's going to be a lot more that we will go over. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific, Wednesday, here on the New Standard Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all tomorrow.